Welcome back. In today's lab, we're going to look at the chemical and physical properties of pure substances. A physical property tends to be something that's inherent to a pure substance. This could be color, density, mass. A chemical property is something that is observed when a substance has undergone a chemical reaction. And in this case, some sort of change occurs. So for example, when you expose copper to heat, it may turn black and eventually could melt. These are chemical changes, and the result and will showcase chemical properties of particular substances. Now, this lab is a fairly short lab and probably won't take you more than 45 minutes to an hour. But again, please make sure you carefully read through the lab handout before going through the lab exercise. This will help you to identify any particular steps that may seem confusing or that may cause you some trouble, and will facilitate a very smooth lab exercise. Now, a couple of safety tips for lab today. First, again, remember, always wear your eye protection. Your eyes are the most sensitive part of your body, and in this lab in particular, you will be using some compounds and chemicals that do pose a safety risk. Two of those chemicals are hydrochloric acid and sodium hydroxide. Now, although these are not concentrated chemicals, they still are at a concentration that could cause slight irritation or even burning of your skin. If you spill either one of these chemicals on yourself, please use copious amounts of water to rinse off the chemical from your hands or skin. If you spill the chemical on a table, again, use copious amounts of water to clean it. And if you spill these chemicals on your clothing, again, use copious amounts of just pure water to clean off the chemical. One thing to be careful of is throwing the shirt or your clothing directly into a washing machine and using detergent. The detergent, along with the acid or the base, could react and could result in a hole in your clothing, and that's something that you want to avoid. Now, one other safety tip related to the hydrochloric acid and the sodium hydroxide. When looking over the lab handout, I noticed there was a step, actually the first step, that tells you to half fill a well in your well plate with the acid and another well with the base, and then to suck it up into a pipette. What I noticed though is that the chemicals already come in sealed pipettes. So this first step is one that you probably do not need to follow through on. Before using these chemicals in the pipettes, very carefully cut off the very tip of the pipette. I would note you do not need to cut it at the base here of the pipette. Just do it at the very top near the tip. Another safety tip is that in this lab you'll be using a number of solids that contain metals, including magnesium and copper and zinc. Please be careful when using these compounds. A few of them are in a powder form, and breathing them in could cause a safety risk. And when you are done with the lab, please make sure that you carefully dispose of these chemicals. As the lab handout instructs, any leftover solids that you have can be disposed of in the garbage by placing them in a sealed baggie or container and then disposing of them in the garbage. Now, a couple of notes about today's lab. The first, as I was reading through the lab handout, in the material section, it calls for the use of a 96 well plate. And upon reading through the lab handout, I noticed that this well plate is not needed in today's lab. So although it asks to use it, you can just simply set it aside. Another note is that you will be testing several different compounds and observing physical properties and chemical properties. In this lab, you have 4 glass test tubes that you'll be using. Please make sure you follow the instructions carefully and test each substance one at a time. Avoid putting different substances into different test tubes at the same time. The easiest thing to do is simply to test one substance, go through all the tests, clean out the test tube, and then move on to the next substance. Now, some of the materials that you're going to be testing are in a powder form, some of them are in a crystal form, and some of them, including the zinc, are in a solid, in a large sort of metal chunks. The zinc will be fairly easy, as you should have 4 pieces to test, and you can put 1 piece in each of the 4 tubes. When it comes to some of the powders and the other materials, what you may want to do, and I've done it here with the copper material, is simply to do the best that you can to pour equal amounts into each of the 4 test tubes. Again, if it turns out that one test tube has a little bit more than another, it's going to be okay. If you have some left over, that's fine as well. And one final note: in this lab, you are asked to heat up your substances using your handy wick burner. In your lab pack, you should have a test tube clamp. Please make sure you use this to hold the test tube over the burner. You want to be very careful, as the test tube can get very hot very quickly. So you don't obviously want to use your hands to touch the test tube. Additionally, when heating the test tube, you want to make sure that you are pointing the test tube away from you and away from anyone else. This will prevent any kind of material from ejecting out of the test tube or spilling over and possibly hurting someone. Finally, after you're done heating the test tube, you want to avoid putting it directly back into the well plate. Doing this could cause the well plate to melt, as it is made of plastic. So after heating the test tube, you may just want to hold it for a little bit using the test tube clamp, allow it to cool before placing it back into the well plate. A few notes about cleaning up. Please follow the directions carefully in the lab handout for disposing of any leftover chemical. The 2 groups of chemicals that you're going to have are acids and bases, and then the solid metals. If you have any acid and base left, hydrochloric acid and sodium hydroxide, these can be disposed of quite easily. Pour any remaining acid into the base. Doing this will neutralize both chemicals and producing water and a very safe salt. Once you've neutralized the acid and the base, the remaining material can be poured down the drain. And again, with the solids, any leftover solids that you have, please put them in a Ziploc baggie or a sealed container, and then dispose of them by placing them in the garbage. Those are the tips and instructions I have for this week's lab. If you have any questions, please make sure you let me know. Good luck.